industry's a recent innovation. Music's been alive, thriving since cavemen. Folk songs so long I've had a place in communities that you should be amazed at it. Then one day came intellectual property, meaning if I think a thought you can't copy me. And if honesty's the best policy, I'd say songs are better off without this monopoly. It'd blatantly be a major fail if they patented the major scale. And downloads don't equate to sales, so taking them away won't make me pay up. Just precludes me from sending your tunes to my friends, so we all lose in the end.
Hello and welcome to the Tech Dirt Podcast. I'm Mike Masnick. This is the second week of our 2-week series on copyright issues. I'm sure we'll cover it again sometime soon. But last week we delved into some common misconceptions around copyright law, leading to a rousing discussion since there are so many common misconceptions. This week we're going to jump right back into the discussion by talking about ways to get past those common misconceptions. And some like to argue that this is just an education issue and that if we just taught more people about copyright law, we'd get past those misconceptions. I am in the camp that is not convinced that this would work. In fact, it reminds me of how the legacy copyright industries like to keep insisting that only if there were more education campaigns, it would magically end piracy and lead people to respect copyright. I don't think that education alone is the answer here, nor do I think that it's particularly effective, because the education really only comes if people are actually interested in the topic on its own, or if they trust the sources that it's coming from. Instead, I would argue that the way to correct the misconceptions has to start with fixing copyright law itself, getting beyond the massive expansion that has made just about everything seem like it's covered in copyright, stamping out widespread public domain, and leading everyone to believe that everything must be owned and that everyone must get paid anytime anyone does something vaguely similar. Once again, this week, in addition to Hirsch Reddy and Dennis Yang, we have our super special guest, Parker Higgins, to lend his insights into this topic. So we'll start again with Parker. How do we get past these misconceptions about copyright law?
Well, I was hoping for more debate, but I think that we're pretty much on the same page. That the root of the problem here is that it's too big and it's too high stakes. The example that Cory Doctorow uses that I love is it's the same body of law that regulates Harry Potter fanfic as regulates whether you can set up a Harry Potter theme park. And so, one of these is a 12-year-old and the other is a studio giant. And that is you just cannot expect the 12-year-old to have the understanding that of the law that's necessary to.
You don't think we should add a copyright curriculum to first grade education?
Well, and so, and that gets proposed, and it gets, And I do think a lot of the people that are, that I agree with on a lot of these issues hear that the MPAA and the RAAA are doing this copyright curriculum, and they respond with saying, like, well, let's make sure it covers fair use, or let's do a fair use curriculum. And I just don't think a 12-year-old has to know either way about fair use.
Yeah.
I think a 12-year-old should not be able to do anything that has statutory damages associated with it for the most part, especially not with a computer. And so I think that everyone should know about fair use. I love fair use, and it's an important part of the law. But we don't teach the law to first graders.
Right.
And I think that's for good reason. I think that we should not be if the law is complicated and in our lives enough that we think that from 6 years old, you have to understand, Section 107, Clause 2 in order to, then that points to something wrong with the law.
All right. So we're done. That's it. This podcast is over. We fixed the law. No problem. So let's get to, so then what would you do?
So, yeah, and this goes back to the question that was posed last week of what's the ideal scenario? And I think that, as long as we're dreaming now, right? This is not...
throw political reality out the window here.
But I think that having, either two bodies of copyright law or one that was between industrial giants,
right,
makes sense. That, they need to, those are big industry contracts. but having it be the same thing that affects people doesn't make sense. And so, I guess that would be the dream, is splitting this and making it so that for the most part, most days, most people didn't need to think about copyright. I mean, I'd be sad because that's what I spend my time doing. But
you'd be out of work.
Yeah,
I'm skeptical if there's like a magic bullet solution like that, even with bifurcation of the law. And the reason is that's just simply kicks the ball down the road. I think because if once you start saying, okay, there's this set of law for industries and this for individuals, then the question becomes, well, what's an industry, what's an individual? And so, for example, what's that big series? 50 Shades of Grey started off as Twilight fiction. And the reason she rebranded it as a different thing in a different world is because obviously, the Twilight, both trademarks and the copyright would prevent her from selling it as Twilight fiction. In a world where there was this bifurcation, she probably could have continued as sort of Twilight brand fan fiction for a longer period of time, until the point where she started monetizing it, and then it would have become a little bit confusing because she would have started off selling 1 or 2 stories, but then it would get to this point where she's selling 100 million, and then finally where she actually outshines the original creation, it would get very complicated indeed. And I think, so there's the real, I think the issue is that we want simplicity in the law, not just for everyday people, but also for the lawyers. I mean, the law is so complicated that the other day, I was complaining about how many bullshit DMCA takedown notices there are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's rampant on places like Etsy, where somebody will say, someone's making a hat of a certain design, and someone will say, my hat's too similar to that, I'm doing a DMCA takedown notice, ridiculous stuff like that. And I was talking about this with another lawyer, and the lawyer tells me, well, that's not really an issue because we have section, I think it's like 512F. Which basically says that if you do a BS takedown notice against someone, you could be liable for damages.
Right.
But that's how the law is written. But the way it actually,
find a case where 512F has actually mattered,
and it's impossible for it to work, and lawyers don't realize that. Why don't they realize that? Because the way the courts do it is you literally need to have a smoking gun when that happens, right? Where somebody has an email that says, "Hey, I'm going to take down Mike's stuff just to screw over his store." You need something like that to show that they subjectively had bad faith in that takedown notice. And who's going to have that? So the law doesn't work there, and even lawyers don't know that, right? And these are people who study this stuff. So it's highly complicated.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. I think that if we're if we're starting at the dream where most people just don't have to think about copyright, and then you step it down a little, I think that certainly there's a lot of ways where you can say, okay, if copyright is actually in our lives every day, let's write the law in such a way that it reflects that. And so
what if we just got rid of copyright is what I'm saying. That's a very simple solution, right?
Well, then it wouldn't be in our lives every day. Yeah.
And according to some, there would be no public domain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
don't you? I mean, would people do anything creative anymore?
With no copyright at all?
We're joking.
No, but let's just think about it for a second. Like when we were talking about patents, we talked about a world without software patents, right? And it didn't necessarily seem like that there would be anarchy if software patents went away, right? What about if just copyright went away?
So, and I actually think that is not that's a reasonable thought experiment. And when you look at a couple of weeks ago, the Green Party of the UK got a lot of attention for proposing copyright terms that were they've got a short term and a long term manifesto. So in their long term manifesto, they said the copyright terms probably shouldn't be more than 14 years, which is about as radical as saying they should be 0 years. Compared to what we have today.
Politically speaking.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because originally they were 14 years.
Right.
If you go back.
What is the term right now?
It's life plus 70 for most things in most places.
Right.
So yeah, it would go from being 100 years to, at least in most cases, to being 14 years. That's really dramatic. And what they didn't get as much attention for is that 2 lines above that in the same section of the same manifesto, they said, and there should be a basic income.
Right.
The way that we handle artists getting paid is we just say, by being a citizen, we give you money to live. And if you want to go and make art and not make more money, you're allowed to. And it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me that a proposal for basic income
right.
was like, okay, yeah, well, that's a Green Party. And then a proposal that they said 14-year copyright terms, and people are like, but what about the artist? And it's like
Yeah.
wow, that is really, it's, one is a lot more politically radical than the other. And so I think, sure, you could imagine a world without copyright. And if we wanted to incentivize the same kinds of things that we have historically liked, maybe you could have, there are other ways.
Other systems for doing things. So what about, one recommendation that I've seen pop up a lot and that I actually find fairly compelling is this idea of returning to a pre-1976 world of formalities in which instead of everything getting automatic copyright upon fixation, creation, whatever you want to call it, you have to register the copyright with the Copyright Office. And if you don't do that, then the work is in the public domain. And under that kind of world, if I just scribble something on a piece of paper, I don't automatically get a copyright on that. And I think that's probably a good thing. And if I send you an email, I don't get a copyright on that. And I think that's a good thing. But the, Disneys of the world can still have their lawyers, register their copyrights, and they still get copyrights. And so that's not a direct bifurcation by saying, well, one law applies for industry and one law doesn't, but it's a way of effectively getting the same thing in many cases. Do we think that that's an effective way of doing things?
Yeah, I think that so where there's kind of gray areas where someone's maybe an industry, maybe an individual,
Sure.
We have metrics kind of, but you're right. There are weird cases where it's like, well, she was an individual, and then eventually she was 50 Shades is an industry. But yeah, I think that there are a lot of proxies you could do. You could do registration. You could even make it very cheap. 10 years ago in free culture, Lawrence Lessig was proposing the first 50 years are free, and then the second 50 years are $1. But you have to register it.
Right.
And so you could imagine even maybe the first 10 years or the first 14 years are free. And then the Disneys of the world register for $1. And we know empirically that 95% of things won't get registered then. And
Right.
so you can count on the public domain, and what you can't count on is in a registry. And that sort of thing would be really helpful because especially when people who make their living in creative sectors talk about this, they talk about the things that affect them making a living. Understandably. I mean,
Yeah.
But the voices that don't get heard as much are the fact that an archive has to be they really want to play by the rules, and so they won't copy things or make derivative works of things unless they really know that's in the public domain for the most part. And so those are things that just don't happen for a century.
Right. And you have the sort of orphan works problem and things that disappear.
Yeah.
Complete areas of culture that completely disappear. And so sort of building on that idea of, maybe free for some time and then register. Another idea that I've heard suggested a couple times is this idea of, a sliding scale, maybe not, free for 50 years and $1 for 50 years, but, free for 5 years, 10 years, and then, cheap for the next 5-10 years, slightly more expensive. And therefore, in that way, you're creating incentives if, some sort of creation is really still economically valuable. 50 years later, you can still pay to do that, but it has to be, really economically viable. So Mickey Mouse could stay under copyright under that scenario, but everything else pretty much goes into the public domain.
And I think Mickey Mouse is there was maybe a misstep by the free culture world by making
Sure.
in a lot of ways the last term extension in 1998 was about Mickey Mouse. It was the Mickey Mouse Protection Act was how it was maligned, but it was really that's really what it was for. And I think people, as a result of that kind of activism, overestimate the degree to which I care about Mickey Mouse. Really, I don't care about Mickey Mouse at all.
Does anybody care about it?
Disney.
Yeah,
cares.
Disney cares.
But are they actually selling? Their new characters are what they're selling.
No, they make a ton of money off
Still?
Mickey Mouse.
Yeah.
I just got back from Disneyland. I can tell you there's a lot of money in Mickey Mouse.
But there are examples of where people have made fair uses of Mickey Mouse, and it is a cultural touchstone. I don't think that it should be completely off of the free speech
and
table.
also I was going to say, separate from the copyright, there's still trademark that they can use.
yeah.
But anyway, sorry, go on.
But I do think that the real damage of term extensions and of ratcheting up copyright is not the Mickey Mouses of the world. If they want to, if they want to do it like a trademark, which you can keep renewing indefinitely
Forever.
that would have a lot less collateral damage than what we have now in copyright, where anything that's the same vintage as Mickey Mouse is also blocked from use, and almost none of that has any commercial value
Whatsoever,
or any
yeah.
like not enough commercial value for commercial studios to spend the money preserving.
Right.
So it disintegrates in the can, and that's
Literally,
like, yeah. And that's the real harm.
Exactly,
And Mickey Mouse is charismatic, but it's not the real problem.
Right. So is it, do we need to protect that 99.999% of stuff that nobody is touching and has no economic value just to protect the Mickey Mouse? So under that scenario, so you find a situation where they would have to pay to renew much more
palatable. And I once it came down to drafting a law, there'd probably be hiccups, but yeah, that sort of thing would give the Disneys of the world what they want. And
so what's the counterpoint to that? Why do people feel that such a proposal is so offensive? Because whenever it's been suggested, people do, you have the same sort of reaction that people had to that.
I can see a scenario in which basically if it were a pay to renew kind of scenario, right, and someone had a work that they didn't renew, and then all of a sudden someone basically used it and created something huge. Like, it's that fairness that I'm trying to get back to, which is it feels like it's like, oh, that was mine. It's like, but you didn't renew. It's like, well, I didn't know that someone was going to make something like that's part of me. It's like, and you feel it's just basically this feeling of ownership over either, especially for the recorded mediums or ideas. It's a very human feeling to feel ownership over something you've created, and I think that's what copyright really kind of scratches that gut feeling of, even when you're on the playground and you make something and someone, copies it. Like, I remember being on the playground and being like, you copied my idea. Like there's something very, very like kind of core and visceral about when someone supposedly copies your idea, right? And I think that's what this really speaks to.
There was a situation recently on Hacker News, or was it on Reddit, where someone released a library under MIT license, and that's a very permissive license. You can do anything you want once you take that code. Yeah. And he wrote this code, and then the person who took the code made like some kind of commercial service or something, or repackaged it and sold it. And the guy was livid, and he wanted to take it out of the license, and like, you can't do that. Once you gave it and someone used it and built something on top of it, you can't.
Right.
And the weird thing was,
because it doesn't feel fair.
Yeah,
right?
The weird thing was that the Reddit or Hacker News crowd, I can't remember which it was totally on the guy's side. But this is the same crowd that in every other situation would be for more.
Well, we see that happen, and I've seen similar things. I didn't see that particular one, but I've seen similar ones. And there was one recently, and I'm sort of blanking on it. I don't know, Parker, if you remember, but there was something recently like that where somebody had released stuff under a Creative Commons license, I think, and then suddenly it was it was a non-commercial license, and then it was being used commercially, and they freaked out. Oh, you know what it was? Where Flickr was going to sell images that had been licensed Creative Commons non-commercial,
they were selling CC commercial.
Yeah, CC like attribution or attribution share.
Okay. Attribution only. Yeah.
This is the non-commercial actually works opposite from the way the other ones do. But so they were doing what people had explicitly allowed by the license. It's as if
I have CC attribution on all my Flickr photos, and people just basically contact me and say, hey, we're using this on this website or for this print, whatever. And I'm like, great, that's exactly what it's for. But I think people don't realize what it means, or...
Well, I think a lot of proponents of like free culture get very protective about their own stuff. It's really weird. Like the same guy, if you go back and looked at his post history, the guy who was complaining about his MIT lab, there would be stuff where he was like complaining about other people not letting them use the software. It's very strange. Like, I don't think people understand the implications of it.
I think some of it is just, when money gets involved, things just get weird. Yeah, and I think...
So... obviously the answer here is to dismantle capitalism.
Well, we've solved that problem too.
Yeah. Next week on the show.
I mean, I would actually like a different, like CC BY is great and not, but I actually appreciate if you would just tell me when you use it. And I think most people do when they use my photos, email me. I don't care about the attribution. I would just love to know, right? So
But let me put it to you this way, Dennis. You wouldn't feel that way if you released a piece of code, open source, and then somebody like Zuckerberg Part 2 took that source, built the website, and made $1 billion.
I would feel that way. No, I think code is actually very, very fascinating, right? Like, especially code, HTML and JavaScript, that I think it's the view source like feature of most browsers is amazing, right? And I think like is code covered by copyright? Like how does that work?
Yeah,
Verbatim,
it is.
to the most
But like I mean, Facebook does use all sorts of
No. There's
free
open
software.
source. No, it does,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I mean,
That's what it's
HTML
for.
and JavaScript,
Yeah.
not the like content of it, but HTML and JavaScript were released free for other people to make money off of.
No, yeah,
and
right.
that's and this
And
is
I mean, I learned to code HTML by copying other people's pages
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
messing with them until I figured out how it worked.
No, absolutely. No, I agree with that. But it's weird though. But people get defensive about their code.
But what I'm saying is that, I mean, in your example, if I wrote an open source library that Zuckerberg 2 made billions of dollars off of, that seems awesome, right? And I don't think I
don't think everyone shares that.
No,
thing,
well, so
that
but
feeling.
there's two aspects there, and I think, and I get this too. Even though, like, I mean, I think about these things all the time. Like, there is an initial gut reaction, which is like, oh fuck, like.
You dropped the F-bomb this time, right?
but there is that initial reaction where it's like, man, that guy just got really wealthy, in part because of something that I did, and so I can't see how people wouldn't have that natural instinctual reaction. But then there's the deeper thought, which is like, there was a lot of stuff that went into whatever the Zuckerberg 2 did to make that happen, and I probably wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And second, like, it's kind of great that I contributed to this.
and I still wrote that code, which should kind of increase my overall value as.
And in fact, the second
Well,
point, which
well,
is then you can leverage that and basically say like, hey, Zuckerberg 3, hire me.
Well, the way these guys, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Dropboxes avoid this, I think, is by hiring the people that do that code and giving them absurd amounts of money. Like
Yeah, often.
the guy who made Python works at Dropbox.
But
and,
how,
so-
how upset are we supposed to get about the that they've
That's
figured
true.
out a way to compensate the creator? That's
I think-
like okay.
No, I'm fine with it. I think the system works for code.
But I think that's kind of a lot of the arguments about Remix and like point to how free and open the coding world has been around sharing code and being open about that, and how quickly that's accelerated the development of of our industry over here. So
Yeah, and I think and this goes a lot of this goes to the fact that copyright was in 1790 it was something, and it's changed and changed and changed, but the way that the law is still structured is you have a handful of exclusive rights,
Right.
and they're enumerated. You can block this, you can block this, you can block this, or license it. But people, because it's expanded so much, people feel like it's kind of the opposite of that, where there's a short white list of things that people can do. So you can use it in non-commercial fanfic or so whatever the short whitelist is. When in fact it's really like, no, the law confers upon you a small handful of things that you're allowed to block, and everything else belongs to the public. And the law hasn't contemplated a Zuckerberg 3 exemption.
Yeah. Well, I think. I mean, there is an element of this that we haven't even discussed, which is, I mean, how the internet itself has played into all of this, right? I mean,
or technology for that matter has.
Yeah, I mean, technology as a whole, you can go back and you can see the examples of, each new technological evolution and how the legacy copyright industry at the time would freak out about it and sue and fight and all of these kinds of things. But each of those were sort of, eventually sort of, you would either duct tape over some new element onto copyright law, or, you would sort of shift things around and come up with some sort of standard. But the internet takes it to a whole different level in a way that, conceptually the internet and copyright law are, as it is today, are so fundamentally at odds that it's almost amazing that they both exist the way they do. And because of that, it's not so surprising that we see hundreds of thousands or millions of takedown notices and these crazy lawsuits and crazy debates and arguments. And yet, when you consider a world where everything is automatically covered under copyright, and you have this giant, massive copying machine that everyone can connect to and make their own copies on, it's almost amazing that actually happened.
Yeah, I think we're in a historical moment where we're gonna go like, wow, those two things existed at the same time.
Right.
Huh.
And so, all right. Well, I don't know that we've solved anything yet, but let's sort of go through. Do we have sort of final closing thoughts in terms of, is it something that we just have to sort of let history play out, or are there things that can actually be done to get people to sort of recognize the importance of these things and recognizing, how copyright can be fixed, or how, well, I don't know, any of these things.
I will say that, we mention it now, and we could have been talking at any point in the last 15 years about like, how do we fix copyright? Right now, and for the last couple of years, we've been in the middle of a legislative process where they're talking about possibly rewriting the Copyright Act. So maybe this matters. And I think that the part of my job that is connecting people with stories to lawmakers is really important right now. That the law really needs to know that there are all these ways in which it doesn't work, because you watch these hearings and you see representatives speak, and these are people who haven't sent emails in many cases, like in their life.
It's crazy.
These are people who they just do not know how these things work, and so I do think that
it's basically like Abraham Lincoln trying to make laws about the internet. I'm not even exaggerating, man. It's crazy.
Right, and
and they don't see what is being hamstrung by
or they think that if it's being hamstrung, it's just sort of a minor issue off to the side, and that we can deal with it, right?
Well, forget about hamstrung. They don't even understand fundamentally the motivations of the players in today's world. Whether it comes to the artists making music, or the guys writing code and sharing it for free, or any of these things, they don't understand the incentive structure, the way these markets are working. They think about a guy coming to market with a cart full of apples. That's kind of
they've got no mental.
They don't understand what's going on. It's crazy. I mean, we'll be the same way when we're 80, legislating for guys who are 15 in a world.
Their holodeck.
Exactly.
Right. So, but I do think that informing those people.
Right.
So we shouldn't be teaching first graders.
Yes.
We should be teaching legislators who are slightly more
important,
sophisticated. I was going to say
slightly more sophisticated
than first graders.
No. My 3-year-old niece knows a lot more about iPads and emails.
And I think doing that there's a lot of ways that if you think about that as an end goal, the TechDirt as a site does this, where you talk about what people are doing and building that mental model for the internet, and I'm trying to connect people directly, and there's all these sorts of things, and I do think that in the near term, just fleshing out that mental model of the internet is more than the cart full of apples that you push into market. Will result in better law, and that's I can say that so optimistically because I'm an activist.
We didn't really touch on it, and I thought it would be a really great part of the conversation. We'll probably have to do it as a follow-up show, but the fact that you were talking about the basic income, and I think there's other things like Kickstarter that could form alternative ways of compensating artists. I think that would be worth talking about, because there's a lot of different ways where we can create an economic incentive.
And we should, we did an episode. Neither of you were here, but we did an episode on basic income, which was actually really interesting. But I think it would be kind of cool to tie it back to this and sort of other business models and things like that. And because there's this belief that goes back to this sort of apple cart thing that bothers me, that this idea that artists can't make a living except but for copyright, and that's, I think, problematic, because I don't think it's true in any way, shape, or form, and yet it drives so much of the narrative. And we even saw that with the UK Greens, and when people saw this proposal to reduce copyright to 14 years, and somebody wrote, but how will I earn a living? It's like, that's a different issue in all sorts of ways. But so I think we'll definitely have to do more on alternative business models and things that are happening and how people are making money today.
Yeah.
But I think we're wrapping up here. Another very interesting conversation. Parker, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
For joining us for
This was fun.
these 2 episodes, and we'll have you back at some point in the future.
If sorry, I have to do the self promo. Of course, I work for EFF, which is at EFF.org, and at EFF on Twitter. And my name is Parker Higgins, and I'm at XOR on Twitter.
Exactly, and you should follow it because he tweets lots of good stuff. I favorite like every damn one of your tweets. All right, and thank you guys for the usual crew, and we'll be back next week with something else. I don't know what we're talking about yet, but we'll figure it out. All right, thanks again. Bye.
guys.
He wasn't there, so let's go back to the start. Before 22, all music's in the public domain, so fuck you. It's never the amateurs that reckon it's damaging us. It's the major label saying it's fatal, like when Napster had to pack a rip by Metallica. The tables turn now, the labels churn out a new Jezebel internet televangelist, and she's fit with a manuscript that was actually written by Mr. Michael.